Dames en heren, goedemiddag.
Hoi hoi, hello and welcome to the Meet Maastricht podcast. I'm Katrina and together with our resident local Lucy, we will be exploring some of the amazing stories that make Maastricht so special. So sit back, relax and join us as we learn about our favourite Dutch city. Hello everyone and welcome to episode 22 of the Meet Maastricht podcast. I am here with Lucy. What are we going to talk about today?
Well, as promised at the end of the last podcast,
Yes.
I just can't go very long without discussing the extremely multifaceted history of the church and the physical remnant of that in this city during these podcasts. So we are talking about St Matthew's, or as we call him, the Matthijs.
Yes. So with St Matthew's, did they have a monastic order attached to them?
No, not at all. This is a particularity of St Matthew's. It is of the Matthijs. I will keep saying Matthijs, I think.
I would try, but I feel like St Matthew's is going to work better for me.
Okay, I will. Yeah, of course. We
can use both. People can learn both. It's fun.
Yeah, we can do that too. Let's just confuse our audience. Okay. No, this is a particularity of St Matthew's for a long, long time. Really, it is the only actual parish church among all those churches that is on the Maastricht side of the river, because the same applies to St Martin's in Wiek. But we generally tend to think only of Maastricht on the one side of the river when we're talking about Maastricht, which of course infuriates everybody on the East Bank, but yeah, sorry guys. It is a parish church in that enormous crowd of churches in the city. All of them are either the churches of convents or of a charter of canons, like Our Sweet Lady and the Sauvage, or they are monastic. So not accessible to lay people at all.
Yeah.
And then of course there will be parish churches added here or there, like St Nicholas to Our Sweet Lady and St John's to the Sauvage. St Nicholas doesn't exist anymore. Huh? Before you're thinking, oh God, did I miss that? No, you didn't. It's gone. But St Matthew's is not connected to any chapter of canons. It is not connected to a monastery or a convent or anything of the sort. It is a people's church.
So does that make it sort of younger than a lot of the churches, or just happen to be that way?
Yeah. And it's this history starts somewhere in the 13th century. We're not exactly sure when. This might be some data I would like to explore further to see if maybe recent research has yielded some new information. But as far as I'm aware at this moment, there has been at least one older church in that location, possibly two. But the present day we are not sure what their name. What the names of those buildings were. I think there has been an archaeological dig that proved the existence of an older building. So that's where this information is based on. So St Matthew's is possibly the second, but probably the third building put in this place, and it's the first that's actually called St Matthew's, as far as we know. And it was constructed in the 15th century. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
But what is an interesting aspect of when this church was founded here at that time is connected to the way the city developed. Of course, this sounds like a very static tale for centuries on end, because after the second wall around Maastricht was built, as far as the city itself, that ground plan didn't really change very much, or not in the main structure. well until into the 20th century, and then of course at the end of the 19th and into the 20th century and 21st century, Maastricht has finally started building outside those walls, but you can still see them in our traffic infrastructure. Just look at a map of the city, you can see the city walls. That is where now the four-lane roads are, and we call them the singles now, the Fronte-singel and the Hertog-singel, and the singles. That's where the walls were, or the fortifications, more specifically. That is the second wall, and the funny thing is that the second wall was built within 200 years of the first wall. So it always makes me wonder, well, couldn't they have thought about that first one a bit more strategically and maybe enclosed enough space right away? But they didn't. In the 13th century, the first wall was built, and you can still find bits and pieces of that all around the city.
I think also it's easy to think that 200 years, when, especially as historians and as people who look back, you're like, 200 years is nothing. But if you think of, 1820 and then 2020.
It's enormous. Yeah. No, this is true. This is true, and also one should not imagine these city walls as what we see now. I mean, in the first instance, this 15th century wall was a rise made of earth, so mud walls, so to speak. So grassy ramparts, so to speak, and over time, this becomes more and more fortified, and over the centuries, because this does take centuries, more and more reinforced with all kinds of constructions. Yeah. But anyway, what happens with this, after this, they decide to build this second wall to the north of the old town, so that is basically to the north of the market. A vast area is then encompassed within the city walls. And several monasteries, which were out in the countryside before, are now in the city within the second wall. And an interesting mix of population who were living just outside the wall now becomes part of the city community within the wall. And it is interesting how that social stratification sort of holds for a long time. There were quite wealthy people living just outside the walls, but there were also farmers and craftspeople, and especially, and we will keep seeing them, the weavers. So the people who made the woolen cloth that was exported from Maastricht all over Europe, basically. Yeah. Oh, wow. And of course also the people with no education, no particular craft, and very little income. And it's really interesting to see that social stratification sort of holds really in that neighborhood until the 19th century when industry settles in that area. So for a long time it is a very large territory within the walls, which is very sparsely populated. There are not a lot of people living there. Yeah.
It's really interesting to think about, because obviously it's quite built up now, that area. Yeah. And there was industry sort of obviously took over a bit, but it's really interesting to think about it being walking past the markt and finding fields and farms
a bit further on to basically where the factory area is now. That's.
I mean, it's not that far to walk though.
No, this is true. Yeah.
Yeah. So St Matthew's, I mean, you say it's connected with. Was it connected with the weavers in any way, or was it just the sort of the parish church for that area?
It was the parish church for that area.
Yeah.
But as was customary in many of the churches, the guilds or the congregations of people with a similar craft, they would have their own chapel or their own altar in a church.
Okay.
And of course these were close relationships physically. So if the weavers were predominantly living in this area around Bos Street, they would have their chapel or their altar in St Matthew's and not in St Servaas. It is also in the lore of the city. The church is the weavers' church. That is how people sort of have it in their minds. And from this, it probably originates also an old, as we call that, a broodje aap story, meaning a monkey sandwich. Yeah, I don't know. In English, it's called an urban legend.
Yeah, I guess to me that makes more sense. But monkey sandwich can do just as well, I suppose.
Yeah, if you know what it means, because otherwise you sort of go blank. But anyway, an urban legend dating back to the 17th century, because of course, as long as there have been herbs, of course there have been urban legends. There's nothing new there. This story is that St. Matthew's was financed from, so to speak, the kas pot of the weavers. I have to explain this. Of course, people were these congregations of like the guilds organizations. Of course, they had the economic function of monopolizing a certain market. That's how they functioned. But of course, they also functioned as a school in many ways, and also in regulating behavior of its members. So yes, there was a fine on cursing. So if you did that as a weaver, you had to make a donation to a fund, and then that money would be used for some, lofty goal once a year or something, have so many masses read or something of the sort. The urban legend is that this fund was sufficient to build the church. Now, please.
So a swear jar built St. Matthew's.
Yeah, no doubt you will come across this story if you continue exploring Maastricht. But yes, I will have to burst that bubble. It is not true.
Oh.
Yeah.
So, but the weavers did help fund the church.
Just
not through their swearing.
Yeah, but quite a bit of the money came from the chapter of Servaas and from the city.
Right.
And this also, this points again to this really unique sort of administrative organization that Maastricht had, the dual authority of the church and state.
Yeah.
And but often, more often than not, cooperating all through the centuries on ruling the city in a sensible fashion and taking care of its people, no matter what our judgments might be today on the type of care. But that was often their primary motive.
Yeah. So, but you said there were, with the weaver as well as the weavers, there were other guilds, and the guilds often had their own altars in a church. So would a church have several altars for different guilds?
Yeah, try and imagine the basic makeup of most medieval churches. There will be the central nave. So when you're standing in the back of the church and you look in front of you, there is the raised area in the choir, and there is the main altar. So that is where Mass is celebrated, and that is where all the chairs and pews are oriented towards. Although, of course, in the oldest churches, people would just have been standing. There wouldn't have been seats.
Yeah.
On either side of the nave, there is, in most churches, on either side, anyway, usually in those separate halls on either side of the central nave, there is space enough for more altars.
Okay.
And when churches become more extended and elaborate, those altars in the side halls can become entire chapels. And you can see this in St. Servaas. So there, and you can see that also from the outside at St. Servaas, how so to speak, tiny little churches, a whole row of them, have been attached to the central church, and each of them will have an altar.
Okay.
And each of them will be dedicated to a particular saint, and they would have been used traditionally by a particular group of people, a guild or a brotherhood or whatever. And masses would be celebrated there, but then for a small amount of people. So when you look at one of these big old churches, what you are really looking at is a collection of a church and lots of little chapels.
Okay.
And this applies all over Europe. I mean, this is not a Maastricht thing, huh? This is the general makeup of a medieval church.
Oh. So did the Weavers Guild or any of the other guilds sort of celebrate different saints in St Matthews?
Yeah.
Do we know? Yeah.
Yeah, there were 4 guilds who had their altar in St. Matthew's and who celebrated their patron saint's feast day there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, there was on the 22nd of October is the day of Sint Matthiaskerk, whom I must admit I have never heard of. And he was probably still is the patron saint of wool workers who were not the weavers. Then the weavers had their patron saint's day on the 3rd of January, and their patron saint is the holy Geneviève in French.
Oh.
Then there was, this is not a patron saint, but the celebration of Christ changing his aspect on the mountain Tabor.
Oh.
And these were the people who grew and sold fruits and vegetables.
Okay.
And then on the day of Mary's Ascension, it was the workers who were carrying loads and pushing carts had their feast day. And this collection of professional occupations already shows you a social structure.
Yeah.
You know, the weavers and the the fullers were skilled craftsmen.
Yes.
The sellers and producers of vegetables and fruit were farmers, of course. And this brotherhood of people carrying loads and pushing carts were, of course, you know, that's the bottom of the social hierarchy.
Yeah. And so with these sort of, I guess, trades and industries, how did they change sort of as the Industrial Revolution and factories and things came up? Because that area now, as we've said, is it's factory land, and it's where is the Sphinx Quarter part of that?
Yeah.
Yes. So how did they turn into bigger industry, or sort of what happened?
Well, it definitely meant that this picture of a very mixed population and still lots of open green spaces for a long time, this drastically changes.
Yeah.
The northern part of this area, which was closest to the city walls, was completely taken over by industry.
Yeah.
The bassin was dug. That was exclusively done for the industries there to ship in the necessary raw materials and to ship out the finished product.
Okay.
And all around the bassin, there were factory buildings and storage spaces and repair shops and whatever, you name it. And the sites of the large convents, the monasteries that were there, at Antonietenklooster and a convent of nuns who educated upper class girls, all those convents were razed to the ground. There, some of them were pretty decrepit because they had been in the line of fire during the big sieges of the 18th century. So it's not as if there were thriving communities there. It was more large stretches of it were empty landscape with ruins. That is picturesque, but you know it is understandable that when Petrus Rigoux and other industrialists with him wanted to build and were forced to build within the city walls, that this is the area they looked at.
Yeah.
An entirely new landscape evolved there. And you can still see traces of this when you go to the Frontensingel, which of course is situated where the wall was, and you look at the shapes of the buildings on the city side. You can see that they follow the line of where the walls were. And of course you can see this in great detail. I'm going to plug one of my other clubs here. When you come and look at the scale model of Maastricht 1867, because those miniature builders have reconstructed the entire industrial zone that existed in 1867. They're pressed up against the fortifications. And what that scale model also shows is how densely built up and populated that area was. And today we would call it a slum. And in the 19th century, of course, people were aware of the horrendous situation there. And some people were pleading for, sanitary measures to improve the hygiene, to feed the people, to improve their housing. But, for a long time, due to the political circumstances at the time, not a lot moved. It really took until the end of the 19th century before circumstances started improving because of improved sanitary conditions, because of children being vaccinated. But also, this brings us back to the parish of St Matthew's, also because new neighborhoods were built for workers. And they were outside where the walls were. So beyond the singles is where the new neighborhoods for the common people were constructed, and the common people left in droves. And before them, the wealthy people had deserted the neighborhood to a large extent. So, at about the middle of the 20th century, the neighborhood was pretty much deserted.
Yeah. And what affected all of that happening, the industrialization and the movement of people and on St Matthew's, on the church? Because I imagine having less people and more industry and then less people had a big impact.
Yes, exactly. And the parish priests have not all been up to the challenges of the times. Yeah. But quite a few of them have worked very hard to try and protect their people, to try and improve the circumstances for their people. But, like I said, the parish became to a large extent depopulated. Yeah. In the course of the 20th century. And then at that time, the city's administrations felt they needed to raise these slums to the ground. And of course, now so many of us are thinking, could you not please just have restored it? I mean, look at what happened to a former slum like the Stokstraat quarter, which is now the poshest shopping district we have. I am not advertising the necessity of shopping here, but at least the neighborhood is preserved to some extent and restored to its original glory. Now, the Boss Street quarter, of course, was never that glorious. It is really only the buildings along the market and the Boss Street that look like more wealth, but that doesn't mean that the working class neighborhoods in the streets that have now all disappeared were any less interesting. It is just that we value them less. But that does not mean that historically they would be less valuable. I know really of only one house, in the entire area between the market and where the city gate used to be, so which is where more or less Bureau Europa is now, or the Muziekgieterij. That is where that area. Well, you can see it. It's where the buildings end. All of that was within the walls. But in that entire area, I really only know of one civilian dwelling that has survived until now, and that is the former Huis met het handje, also in at risk of being flattened like just about everything else, and they have just restored it, keeping all the original features there. Wow. So you can see that the steps going up a floor, that they have been used twice. That when one plane of those steps was worn down too much, that the steps were just turned around and used the second time. This points to great poverty. Yeah. But of course, historically speaking, it's gold.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah, we have just, except for that one house, there's nothing left of all of that. And but okay, go and wander the side streets, and you will still find lovely houses, but only when you're standing with your back to the markt, facing down the Bos Street, to the left-hand side of the Bos Street. When you go to the streets to the right hand of the Bos Street, that's all new. All of that was built in the 1970s and 80s. And they have at any rate retained the original street names. So there is still a Raamstraat. Raam meaning the frame that the weavers used to weave the wool on. And there is so not raam as in window. It means frame in this context. And there is a Lakenweversplein, meaning the wool weavers square. Yeah. So the old names have been retained, or there are at least pointers to the history of the place. But all the buildings there are new.
Well, like you say, you can sort of have a walk around. Can you also go into St Matthew's still?
I find that cumbersome. I mean, you can go in during the masses.
Okay.
And they will be listed on the door.
Mm-hmm.
And I do recommend you go inside and have a look, and not the touristy kind of look, pointing your camera everywhere and then leaving again. Just, sit down for a while and, just get yourself into the pace of something that has been there for 500 years.
Yeah.
And then take your time with it. What is always accessible is a very small chapel to the left of it, dedicated to Our Sweet Lady of Banu. Banu being a pilgrimage destination very close to Maastricht in Belgium. And you can go and light a candle there, and and also sort of recuperate from the pace of the city and just calm down for a second. And I think during the daytime, to the right of the church, there is a little gate with a grill, and I think during the daytime that is open, and you find yourself then in a cobblestone courtyard with buildings that still belong to the church or used to belong to the church. And on your right hand side, one that is called het Conventje, or from the French le convent. So it's a small convent.
Okay.
And that was dedicated by the founder of the Bayard. He bought that and he gave it to the parish for old ladies to live in.
Oh.
And then there's a wall again closing off this little courtyard, and when you go through that, you find yourself in an alleyway that goes basically from the market into the neighborhood. And if you follow the wall to your left, you are following the wall of the garden of the church, which is not accessible. You can see the trees over the wall, but you can't get into the garden. But at the very corner of the garden, there is again a small accessible chapel, and that is dedicated to the Saint Anthony that I mentioned before. Yes. The one who helps you find things.
Lots of exploring for people to do.
Yes,
obviously and respectful exploring.
Yes, please.
In the church space, and but some things to hunt out if you're looking for a peaceful afternoon.
Yes, and it's it is interesting to wander around in that neighborhood and see how the different epochs in the history of the city have washed over this area and left their traces. And of course now St Matthew's is still one of the only four inner city parishes of the city, and of course that like I said, that dates back 500 years. So it's a venerable old place.
So what are we talking about next time?
The star. The Maastrichtenaren will know what that is.
To me, it sounds like a noise. I don't.
Yeah. Yeah. In Dutch, it is also an eye affliction, but it's sorry.
Oh, like a sty?
No, star is the Maastricht word for star.
Oh, star. Okay.
Which in Dutch is ster. And the older generations of Maastrichtenaren will know that I am referring now to a concert hall.
Oh.
Yeah. It has been demolished.
Oh.
It also relates to a legendary choir, a men's choir, which still exists.
Oh, how exciting. I always
Yeah.
like when we do anything related where I can put a snippet of music in, because I find it really interesting.
Yeah, and of course in Maastricht, this city sings. No matter what subject you are talking about, there's always music involved. So, but the style is basically all about music. So,
Well,
go ahead.
I look forward to it.
Good.
Thank you so much for joining us today, and don't forget to follow us on social media. You can find us on Facebook by searching Meet Maastricht and on Instagram at @meet_Maastricht. If you would like to learn more about us, you can also visit our website at meetmaastricht.eu, where you can buy tickets and subscribe to our monthly newsletter so you're always up to date. Thanks again, and tune in next time to learn more about our beautiful city.
Tot ziens.